The billionaire's mansion stood like a monument to wealth and success, nestled in a private estate far from the noise of the outside world. Its grand architecture, sprawling gardens, and perfectly polished marble floors spoke of a life built on power, precision, and control. Inside, everything gleamed with perfection, but the air was heavy, as if something vital was missing. In the heart of all this grandeur lived a young boy, the billionaire's only son, confined to a wheelchair since the accident that had changed their lives forever. Once a lively, spirited child who ran through the halls laughing, the boy now sat in silence by the tall windows, staring blankly at the world beyond the glass. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, were dulled by pain and isolation. No one spoke much to him anymore. Nurses came and went, speaking in low, clinical tones. Therapists tried, but their scheduled visits brought no real change. His father, though present in the same house, was often locked away in his office or out on business trips, unable, or unwilling, to connect with his son's suffering. The billionaire himself was a man hardened by loss and consumed by work. Since the accident, he had buried himself in corporate meetings and investment deals, perhaps in an effort to escape the guilt he felt. He had built empires, toppled rivals, and climbed to the top of the world, yet he couldn't face the quiet pain of the little boy who had once called him hero. The mansion, though luxurious, had grown cold and silent. Every room echoed with unspoken sorrow, every hallway a reminder of happier times that now felt unreachable. Amidst all the beauty and luxury, there was a growing emptiness, a quiet plea for healing, waiting to be heard. The mansion's silence was gently disturbed one morning by the arrival of a new maid, a young woman named Elena. She stepped cautiously through the grand double doors, her eyes wide as she took in the glittering chandeliers and the sweeping staircase that curved like a ribbon through the entry hall. Though awed by her surroundings, Elena carried a quiet strength and warmth in her demeanor that set her apart from the staff already in place. Dressed in a modest uniform, with her dark hair pulled neatly back and a satchel slung over her shoulder, she had no idea that this job would change her life, and the lives of those within the mansion, forever. Elena was not hired through an agency or high-profile service. She came on recommendation from a distant relative of the head housekeeper. Her resume wasn't extraordinary: a few previous cleaning jobs, a background in caregiving, and a reputation for kindness and patience. The billionaire had barely glanced at her file before approving her employment. To him, she was just another employee in a long list of names he didn't bother to remember. Her first days were spent in quiet observation. Elena moved carefully through the halls, polishing banisters, wiping down windows, and folding linens with practiced precision. But it wasn't the mansion's luxury that caught her attention, it was the boy. She saw him on her second day, sitting alone in a wheelchair by the window in the sunroom, his gaze fixed outside, unmoving. No toys. No books. Just silence. Something about the scene struck her heart. There was no joy in his eyes, only stillness, like a candle slowly burning out. She began to notice how the other staff treated the boy with polite distance. No one was unkind, but few interacted with him beyond necessity. He was spoken to softly, often in a tone reserved for the very ill, and rarely engaged. Elena, however, felt a quiet pull toward him. Each time she passed the sunroom, she lingered just a second longer, hoping to catch even the slightest change in his expression. She didn't know his name yet, but something in her heart told her he needed more than just care, he needed connection. It was a rainy afternoon when Elena found herself alone in the sunroom, quietly dusting the high shelves while the boy sat nearby, staring blankly out the window as gray clouds rolled across the sky. The soft patter of rain against the glass only deepened the stillness in the room. The boy hadn't said a word since she arrived, nor had he acknowledged her presence beyond a few glances. Yet, Elena didn't mind. She had grown used to silence, it gave her space to listen, to feel what others didn't say. Humming quietly to herself as she worked, Elena found a small speaker tucked in the cleaning cabinet. Curious, she wiped it off, connected it to her phone, and played a soft, cheerful tune, something old-fashioned and gentle, filled with rhythm and warmth. The music floated through the room like a breeze, light and unexpected. At first, the boy didn't move. But then, Elena noticed something, a faint twitch in his fingers, a small shift in his eyes. He was listening. Encouraged, she began to dance, nothing elaborate, just simple sways and playful spins as she dusted and moved around the room. She wasn't performing, she was simply letting the music guide her, losing herself in the moment. As she twirled past the boy, she smiled at him gently, not expecting anything in return. But to her surprise, his lips parted ever so slightly, and a tiny smile flickered, brief but real. Elena paused, heart fluttering. She crouched beside him and said softly, "You like music, don't you?" The boy didn't respond with words, but his eyes met hers, and that was enough. She placed his hand in hers and gently moved it to the rhythm of the song, guiding his arm like a dance partner. His hand was stiff at first, hesitant. But slowly, gradually, he allowed her to lead. That small moment of movement, of shared rhythm, became the beginning of something magical. For the first time in months, the boy wasn't just existing, he was participating. There was a spark, a glimmer of life in his still body. And though it was subtle, Elena saw it clearly. It wasn't just music, it was hope. In the days that followed, a quiet transformation began to take shape within the sunroom. Every afternoon, when the rest of the staff were occupied and the house seemed to hold its breath in silence, Elena would return with her little speaker and a new song. Sometimes it was a soft piano melody, other times something more upbeat and cheerful. She never forced anything, never expected more than the boy could give. She simply offered a presence, patient, joyful, and free of judgment. At first, the boy remained mostly still, watching her from his wheelchair, his expression guarded but curious. Elena danced anyway, swaying through shafts of sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. She spoke to him casually, as if he were an old friend, about the weather, the birds in the garden, or a memory from her childhood. Bit by bit, he began to respond, a blink, a nod, a faint curl of the lips. Then, one afternoon, something changed. As Elena danced to a slow waltz, the boy lifted his hand without being asked. It trembled, uncertain, but it moved, toward her. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She immediately stepped closer, gently taking his hand in hers, guiding it through the air with the rhythm of the music. His grip was weak, but it was there. And in that moment, they danced. From that day on, their secret sessions became a daily ritual. Elena brought scarves to twirl, silly hats to wear, and even made paper flowers they could toss and catch. The boy began smiling more often, occasionally laughing, a soft, quiet sound that melted Elena's heart. Every time. His movements grew stronger, more confident. First his arms, then subtle shifts in his legs, toes twitching to the beat. He was awakening, little by little. They never spoke of it outside the sunroom. Elena didn't want to draw attention, and the boy, still shy and uncertain, seemed to cherish the privacy of their little world. The rest of the staff remained unaware, and the billionaire himself had no idea of the gentle miracle unfolding just a few rooms away. But within those sunlit walls, something beautiful was taking root. Not just the boy's slow return to movement, but a bond between two souls who had quietly found each other in the quiet shadows of a lonely mansion. The sunroom was glowing with golden light that late afternoon, the kind that made the air feel warmer, softer, as if time itself had slowed. Elena had chosen a lively tune that day, something playful and full of energy. The boy, now visibly more alert and engaged, was seated upright in his wheelchair, his hands resting on the arms with quiet determination. Elena moved with ease, dancing around him, then gently encouraging him to move with her. He extended one foot forward, a movement that just weeks ago had seemed impossible. His leg trembled, but it obeyed. Elena clapped softly and smiled wide. "You're getting stronger every day," she whispered. He grinned at her, not with the timid smile of before, but with genuine joy. She offered her hand. He took it. Together, they swayed slowly, his hand in hers, her other arm lightly supporting his back. He leaned forward, putting effort into lifting himself slightly from the chair. For the briefest moment, he stood, shaky, unsure, but upright. Elena gasped, and tears sprang to her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. And then, without warning, the moment shattered. A deep voice cut through the music. "What is going on here?" They both froze. The boy collapsed back into the chair, startled. Elena turned, heart thudding, to see the billionaire standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, shock, confusion, and something darker beneath it. The music played on awkwardly in the background, but neither of them moved to stop it. I asked you a question, the man repeated, stepping into the room. His eyes swept over the scene, the maid holding his son's hand, the speaker still playing, the boy flushed with effort. Why are you making him do this? Elena instinctively stepped in front of the boy, her hands raised slightly. He wanted to dance. We've been doing this for a while now, sir. It helps him. He's been improving. Improving. The billionaire's voice rose slightly, anger and disbelief mixing. He could hurt himself. You were hired to clean, not play therapist. I know, she said calmly, though her chest tightened. But your son, he's coming alive again. You just saw it. He stood, even if just for a second. The billionaire's gaze flicked to his son, who now looked down, unsure and afraid. The silence between father and son was deafening. Elena didn't step back. Her voice softened. He's not just surviving anymore. He's trying. Please don't take this from him. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the fading music. The silence hung heavy in the sunroom, thicker than the warm air around them. The music had stopped, but its echo still lingered faintly, like a memory that refused to leave. The billionaire stood rigid near the doorway, his jaw clenched, eyes flickering with conflict. Elena remained by the boy's side, not moving, her hands gently resting on the arms of his wheelchair. She could feel the tension radiating off the man, but she refused to look away or shrink under his disapproval. Finally, he stepped forward, slowly, his expensive shoes tapping against the polished floor. You think this is helping? He asked, his voice quieter now, but still laced with disbelief. You're not a therapist. You're a maid. This isn't your place. Elena swallowed hard. Her voice trembled, but her conviction did not. With respect, sir, maybe it should have been someone's place. He hasn't been living, he's been existing. Alone. Forgotten. She glanced at the boy, then looked back at his father. I didn't plan this. I just danced. He responded. And I kept coming back because he smiled. Then he moved. Then, he stood. The billionaire's eyes shifted to his son again, searching. The boy wouldn't meet his gaze. His fingers fidgeted nervously in his lap, his posture tense, like he was bracing for disappointment. Is that true? The father asked, his voice lower now, almost uncertain. Did you stand? The boy hesitated, then slowly nodded. Still not looking at him, he whispered so softly it was almost a breath, just for a second. The billionaire's shoulders seemed to drop a little, the weight of those words hitting him harder than he expected. He took a step closer, hesitant now. Why didn't you tell me? The boy finally looked up. There was no anger in his face, only pain. You stopped asking. The words pierced through the father like a knife. His mouth opened slightly, but no response came. He looked at his son, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time in months. The color in his cheeks, the light in his eyes, the subtle strength in his posture. He looked different, better, stronger. Elena stood quietly, watching the silent exchange, her chest tight with emotion. She wanted to speak, to soften the moment, but she knew it wasn't her place now. This was between father and son. After a long pause, the billionaire turned to her again, his expression unreadable. But his voice was softer, no longer laced with anger. Thank you, he said, almost reluctantly, but sincerely. Elena blinked, caught off guard. I didn't realize how much I've been missing, he continued, turning back to his son. How much he's been missing. And for the first time in a very long while, the boy smiled, directly at his father. The sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long, golden beams across the floor of the sunroom, but none of the three people inside seemed to notice. The moment between father and son stretched on, full of unsaid words and buried emotions. The billionaire stood in stillness, the weight of his son's quiet statement, "You stopped asking," echoing in his mind. It gnawed at something deep inside him, something he had tried for so long to ignore. He had spent months, no, years, trying to shield himself from the unbearable guilt of that one terrible day. The accident had taken more than just his son's ability to walk, it had taken their connection, their laughter, their bond. And instead of facing it, he had hidden behind meetings and boardrooms, behind silence and security gates, pretending that distance could protect him from pain. But now, looking at his son, alive, smiling, stronger, that fragile wall he'd built began to crack. He took another step forward, slower this time, not as a man of power, but as a father. His voice was rough with emotion. I didn't know how to help you. Every time I looked at you, I saw what happened. I thought staying away would hurt you less." The boy's eyes welled with tears, but he didn't look away. His voice trembled. It hurt more. Those words broke what little resistance the billionaire had left. He knelt in front of his son's wheelchair, something he hadn't done since before the accident. His hands shook slightly as he reached forward and placed them gently over his son's. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was only protecting myself." The boy didn't speak. Instead, he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around his father's neck. It was awkward, the embrace of a child who hadn't been held in too long, but it was real. The billionaire closed his eyes, holding his son tightly, feeling a warmth he had feared was lost forever. Elena stood quietly to the side, her hands clasped over her chest, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had never meant to become part of this family's healing, yet here she was, a witness to something far greater than anything she had intended. The billionaire pulled back slightly, brushing a hand through his son's hair. He looked up at Elena, his voice steady now. "You've given me back my son. I don't have the words for what that means." He paused, then added, "But I want you to stay. Not just as a maid. As someone who helps him continue this, whatever this is. If you're willing." Elena nodded, overwhelmed, unable to speak. The boy looked up at her, eyes bright with gratitude, and reached for her hand. In that room, filled with quiet music, long shadows, and the scent of blooming garden roses drifting through the open windows, something long frozen had begun to thaw. Not just a body, but a heart. Not just a boy, but a father. And together, they were learning to begin again. Weeks passed, and the mansion slowly began to change, not in its structure or decoration, but in the air itself. Where there had once been silence and stillness, now there was life. Laughter. Music. The rooms that had echoed with loneliness now hummed with conversation and warmth. It started in small ways. The curtains in the sunroom were left open more often, letting in the light. The doors, once closed tightly, now stood ajar. The staff noticed it too. They smiled more, whispered less. Something had shifted, undeniably. Each day, Elena continued the sessions with the boy, though now, they were no longer a secret. The billionaire, who had once been a distant figure behind a wall of grief and routine, had become a present, active part of his son's life. At first, he simply watched. He stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, unsure of how to step into a space so unfamiliar to him. But slowly, he began participating. One day, he clapped to the rhythm. Another day, he helped guide his son's hand. Eventually, he danced too, awkwardly, stiffly, but with heart. Elena and the boy didn't laugh at him. They welcomed him. The boy, who now walked short distances with a cane, grew stronger each day. With each step, his confidence grew, and so did his voice. He began speaking more, cracking jokes, asking questions, rediscovering the world beyond his wheelchair. His therapists were stunned. The doctors called it remarkable progress. But those inside the mansion knew it wasn't medicine alone that brought the healing. It was connection, joy, and the return of something far more important, hope. One morning, the boy stood on his own for the first time without support. It was only for a few seconds, but it was enough to bring Elena to tears and his father to his knees in gratitude. No one clapped. No one made a show. They simply stood together, quiet and reverent, as if witnessing a miracle. Because in many ways, they were. The mansion itself began to reflect the family's transformation. Fresh flowers appeared in every room. Music drifted down the halls, sometimes classical, sometimes silly songs the boy loved. The dining room, once a place of cold, silent meals, now rang with conversation as father and son shared dinner each evening, sometimes joined by Elena, who had become more than just staff. She was part of the family now, a quiet anchor who had brought them back to each other. And so, a house that had once been a gilded prison turned into a home, a place of healing, laughter, and second chances. The boy no longer looked out the window wishing for the world beyond. He now walked through the garden with his father and Elena, the sun on his face, the wind in his hair, and a life, full and beautiful, stretching out before him.